I'm Bassam Salem. I was born in Cairo, Egypt, but I've lived in the United States now for almost 37 years. I came with my parents, and I'm the oldest of 3 children. We came to the US, and particularly here, Salt Lake City, Utah, on student visas. So my dad had an F1 to go to graduate school at the University of Utah. Eventually, all of us went through the university as F1 students. So my mom was a computer engineer, and I remember she would come home with what were called Winchester drives. They were these big cylindrical drives that you would stick in mainframe computers. My family was comfortable, but we weren't wealthy enough to be able to own a computer very, very easily, certainly not in the early 80s. But my first exposure to programming was when a wealthy kid in my class in Egypt told me that he just bought a computer to play video games and he didn't need the programming book. So he gave it to me, and it was a book about BASIC, the programming language. And I taught myself BASIC from this manual, and I loved writing programs down. I didn't have a computer, so I'd write programs down on pieces of paper, and I kept a catalog of them, knowing that at some point I'd be able to actually type it into a computer and have it work. My father and mother recognized that I'd put in that effort, and my first computer cost my parents 2 months of their salary. It was a Sinclair QL. QL stood for Quantum Leap. It didn't get any cooler than that. This is my very, very, very first computer, which my parents bought. It's a very fancy machine, so we had to make a custom cover for it. This thing might be worth something now. If it still works, I bet it still does, because this was my pride and joy. I loved this thing. I coveted this thing. I dreamt about it for years. Not many parents would give up 2 months of their salary for their son or daughter to have something that they thought as unlocking future opportunity. I went from loving Mickey Mouse magazines to loving computer programming magazines, where in the back they'd have source code. They'd have code that you would type in to your computer and get a simple game to play, or some cool graphical effect. And I remember spending my weekends for 4 or 5 hours typing in this code, this basic code. And for those who are technical, they're called data statements with just tons and tons of numbers. And then you'd play the game and there'd be some flicker or some mistake that you could tell, and like, oh my gosh, something was wrong in one of the 10,000 numbers I wrote. I need to go over all those numbers again.
Now, we haven't had time to cover the whole of BASIC in this videotape, but I hope we've covered enough to give you a good start along the road of writing your own programs.
Growing up, I always felt a little bit out of place. It wasn't long before my mother took me to Paris with her as she was studying. I was just 4 or 5 years old. I still remember going to a French school for the first day and speaking not a word of French, having only spoken Arabic at that point. A few years later, when my dad went to England to study, the whole family went over there. I absolutely felt like an immigrant in Bracknell, England in 1979. A very small town back then. It's much bigger now. Not very many folks from other countries, and it was definitely tough to fit in. But going back to Egypt, I have to admit, once again, we felt like we were westernized Egyptians. Having grown up in Cairo for much of my childhood, the notion of a big city was what was normal to me. The busyness, the ambient noise all the time that exists in a big city was what was normal. And I still remember arriving here in September of 1986 in Salt Lake City, Utah. It was wide streets with very few people. It was so quiet and it was so clean. It was just a really foreign feeling. Everything in the US felt so enormous at the time, not just the cars, but the streets, the buildings, the distances that you cover. It really, I still remember that sensation. I also remember my first day as a sophomore at East High School. I remember thinking, I should understand English, but when they announced something on the PA, I had no idea what a PA was, about an assembly. And I remember sitting in a biology class thinking, I'd have to ask someone what this assembly is and where I need to go. There was enough variation in English that I still felt very, very out of the loop for quite a few weeks. I really appreciate how hard this must have been for my parents now that I'm an adult myself. My dad was already in his mid-40s. Both of them had very successful careers in Egypt, and they gave up everything to become students in their mid-40s at a university in another country where they had no income. I still remember to this day spending $2,800 on our 1979 Buick station wagon because it became too hard to take the bus down to Smith's to get groceries and back up. It was just an ordeal to get groceries. We came here, and initially they didn't actually have a 3-bedroom apartment at the University Village. They only had a 2-bedroom. So we stayed there for some time until a 3-bedroom became available. And I remember thinking, everything is big in the US, except our apartment here is a little smaller than our apartment in Egypt. My poor parents had to be constantly going to school. My father ended up doing 2 PhDs just to keep his visa status. So I had to find a path as quickly as possible to becoming a citizen so I could then sponsor their status. I studied computer science. I loved computer science. My mother was a computer engineer in Egypt and really inspired me to pursue that field. It was the heyday of the computer. The personal computer was just coming about in the 80s, and then the internet in the 90s. So to have been able to study computer science at a time when it was fundamentally changing. I applied to a number of universities, including the University of Utah. I applied to top 20 programs. Not one accepted me, including my own university, including the University of Utah. So I was really devastated. My visa status, now that I was over 18, was based on the fact that I had to be enrolled. I mean this sincerely, I was thinking, might I have to go back to Egypt, which would now be an entirely foreign country to me. I'm going to mention his name because he was impactful in my life. His name was Dr. Lee Haller, and Lee heard of my situation, I'm not sure how, and asked me to talk to him and let me know that he'd like to help me, and if I would work in his lab over the summer, he will see what he could do. I did everything I could to impress Dr. Lee Haller, and at the end of the summer, he was able to get me provisional acceptance into the department. And now I had something to prove, because now I wanted to prove to everybody that I was going to be an amazing student. I was going to get all A's. I deserved to be here. But I quickly realized that this was a temporary situation, because a master's degree is just a couple of years, and then I'd be running into the same exact situation once again. So I began learning about the H-1B and how I could potentially, if I could find a company that felt that I had a specialty that was material, I might be able to get an H-1B. I had done library programming, and by coincidence, there was a company in Salt Lake City that did library automation software. So I thought, I'm getting a master's degree. What if I finish the master's degree, leverage the fact that I have library software experience and apply there and see if I can get an H-1B? And sure enough, I was able to get a job making, at the time, what felt like enormous money. $40,000 a year, yes. That job enabled what was the first moments of feeling like Americans, because my parents had just enough for a small down payment, and I could now get a loan, and we were able to get our first family home, which really made us feel like locals. I loved working in software. I loved being a software engineer. It was incredible to be part of a team, seeing the evolution and the emergence of personal computers, the emergence of the internet, the emergence of social media and digitization, and now artificial intelligence. It's amazing, but I dare say it's not slowing down. It's just going to accelerate. So arguably younger people are going to experience even more dramatic change. I decided to go back and do an MBA at the university just to sort of shore up my ability to say, I'm a computer scientist, but I can do the business side as well. And in 2000, I was given that shot. So I became a manager for the first time in 2000, which was a big deal to me, and really started my career as an operations executive. I was able to work for some incredible companies. Having lived here in Utah, you'd think that I would be limited in terms of the scale of the companies back then that I could work for, but I worked for companies like IBM Global Services and Philips Electronics, SimpleCitizen, which was later acquired by Oracle. I got to work for an amazing tech company here in Utah that was eventually acquired by Adobe. And it was just fantastic to be part of the evolution of the high-tech world, the evolution of the internet, and to have been able to ride that professionally and to really impact my life here. So I got to go from managing a small team to increasingly bigger teams over the years. In 2015, I got to the point where I had a really large team of over 2,100 people across 18 offices around the world. It was a really, really large operation. I remember thinking, I can't believe the little boy from Egypt is now running this big organization. So our company is 7 years old now, 7.5 years old. We've been in this office for a couple of years, but it's really been material for us because it was our first real office. As an immigrant myself, it was so important to me that we be friendly to those who don't look like everybody else here in Utah. So I'm proud to say that, and some of them are represented here, that a third of our team wasn't even born in this country, which is not bad for a little company out of Park City, Utah. So I've always believed that if you don't have real intimate relationships with people, you can't go through hard things with them. So to build a really great team, you have to build intimacy. It's really fulfilling to me just to look at this team and see them having fun together. It's really, really cool. The ride from 1995, my first professional job, to 2015 was truly, I'm so fortunate to have been able to experience that. I was in the right place at the right time, studying the right thing. It transformed my life, and it allowed me eventually to get citizenship, which means I was able to sponsor both of my parents. Finally, they didn't have to stay on the academic treadmill. But I'm afraid I still feel like my parents, their only comfort is seeing that their kids were able to make the most of the opportunity that we were given. But I dare say theirs was really a story of only sacrifice. They never got to see the benefit for themselves. They were never able to get a work permit in time to actually be able to work. So even though my father had 2 PhDs, he was already a little older and wasn't given an opportunity to be a professor, even though he really wanted to be, and I think he would have been an amazing professor. I already have the thought, how many more generations is it going to take before my descendants are Americans who forget that they come from immigrants? How many generations is it going to be before we're not so friendly to immigrant policies that brought my own descendants here? It doesn't feel like very long. It could be their kids. We live in a great country. There are things we need to improve. I really hope that over time, it just doesn't take us too long, but I hope that over time we can make these small changes within each generation and just get better, get more accepting, make it more equitable, make it easier for people who come into the world at different levels to sort of equalize the opportunity we give everyone. As I think about our two boys who are first-generation Americans, I think all I really hope that they sort of keep with them is, one, remember the story that brought them here, not just mine and my wife's, but our parents and beyond. But second, I hope that they can keep the immigrant work ethic, the immigrant desire to achieve and not settle. By definition, immigrants come here because they don't want to settle for their status quo. They want to achieve more. They're willing to work for it. And I really hope our boys and all of our descendants can just keep that mentality going and can keep improving and growing.